$1.3 billion. Say that number out loud. Sit with it for a second. Not stolen in a single night. Not pulled from a vault with a mask and a getaway car. Let out slowly, patiently, invisibly, from a system built by the American government to protect the sick, the elderly, and the forgotten. A system funded by every working taxpayer in the country, including you. $1.3 billion. Enough to fund a small nation's entire healthcare budget for a full year. Enough to pay the salaries of 10,000 nurses for a decade. Enough to build hospitals in communities that have never had one. And it passed through the hands of one man, a man who believed, for over a decade, that he was completely untouchable. His name was Philip Esformes. You won't find his face on a wanted poster. You'll find it on the cover of Miami real estate magazines. Smiling, tanned, relaxed, a king in a tailored suit, presiding over an empire, not of hotels, not of casinos, but of nursing homes, assisted living facilities, the places we send the people we love most when we can no longer care for them ourselves. Think about that for a moment. The people we trust with our most vulnerable loved ones. Our parents, our grandparents, people who can no longer speak for themselves, fight for themselves, or question the care they receive. That is exactly who Esformes chose to exploit. He didn't build a business. He built a machine that turned human vulnerability into a billing code, and billing codes into private jets. A machine so sophisticated, so well disguised, that it ran for years without anyone in authority blinking twice. This is not a story about Medicare. This is not a story about money. This is a story about what happens when greed gets a medical license, and the system hands it the keys. And his downfall, the one that ultimately exposed the largest healthcare fraud in American history, began with a single mistake, one he never saw coming. To understand the king, you have to understand the kingdom he inherited. Philip Esformes didn't build his empire from scratch. He was born into the family business, a network of nursing homes and assisted living facilities scattered across Miami-Dade County, Florida. On paper, it was a legitimate healthcare operation. His father, Morris Esformes, had built the foundation over decades. Philip stepped in and expanded it. To the outside world, it looked unremarkable. Beige buildings, quiet parking lots, fluorescent lights flickering over linoleum hallways. The kind of place you drive past without a second glance. The kind of place most people prefer not to think about at all. But that invisibility, that forgettability, that was the point. Because inside those walls, according to federal court records, something else entirely was being manufactured. Not care, not recovery, not dignity for the people living there. Inventory, human beings, reduced to billing codes, patients cataloged, processed, and cycled through a system designed not to heal them, but to extract maximum value from their existence within it. Now picture Philip Esformes' personal world, just for a second. A waterfront estate in one of Miami's most exclusive neighborhoods. A fleet of luxury vehicles, courtside seats at NBA games, private jets available on standby, an annual lifestyle that prosecutors would later describe as opulent beyond justification. Now picture the other side of that ledger. Fluorescent hallways, elderly residents shuffled from facility to facility like cargo on a conveyor belt. Not because their medical condition required a transfer, not because a doctor determined they needed a different level of care, but because moving them, simply moving a human being from one building to another, meant generating a new round of billing claims. A new invoice, a new payment for Medicare or Medicaid. Again, and again, and again. Follow the money. Here is the mechanism, stripped down to its bones. Because understanding how this worked is the only way to grasp how breathtaking its scale truly was. Records show Esformes built a web of what federal investigators would come to call shell facilities. Care centers and assisted living properties that existed on paper with real addresses, real Medicare billing numbers, real state licenses, but operating as little more than vehicles for fraudulent claims. These facilities generated invoices for services that were exaggerated beyond recognition, medically unnecessary, or in many cases, according to unsealed court documents, simply never delivered at all. To keep the pipeline flowing without interruption, prosecutors allege Esformes orchestrated a sophisticated kickback scheme, bribes paid to doctors who would refer patients into his network regardless of medical need, Payments made to administrators who would look the other way when billing claims defied any clinical logic. Fees disguised as consulting arrangements, rental agreements, and referral payments, all engineered to appear legitimate on the surface while fueling a criminal enterprise beneath it. And at the center of this entire operation, its most essential raw material were the patients themselves. Patients with serious disabilities, patients with psychiatric conditions, patients living with dementia, elderly men and women who couldn't review their own medical records, question why they'd been transferred, or understand that their names and Medicare numbers were being used to generate millions of dollars in fraudulent claims. In the eyes of this machine, they were not human beings in need of care. They were the most valuable asset in the operation. Compliant, untraceable, renewable, profitable. Here's what separates a great fraudster from a petty criminal. A petty criminal commits a crime. A great fraudster builds a system. And that is exactly what Philip Esformes did. This wasn't a man cutting corners on a few billing claims. This wasn't a single facility inflating invoices to make up for a bad quarter. This was a deliberate, multi-facility, multi-year architecture designed from the ground up to survive regulatory scrutiny, government audits, and the ordinary mechanisms of oversight that are supposed to catch exactly this kind of thing. Modern financial fraud doesn't look like a man in a ski mask. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave obvious fingerprints. It looks like a spreadsheet. It looks like a compliance report filed on time. It looks like a man who understood, better than almost anyone operating in America, that the most heavily regulated industry in the country was simultaneously one of the easiest to exploit at scale because the system was built on trust, on assumption, on the reasonable belief that the people providing care were motivated by something other than greed. No one expects the predator to be wearing a white coat. For years, year after year, the claims kept flowing. The money kept moving. Through shell companies, through layered corporate structures, through operating agreements and management contracts designed to obscure the true flow of funds from anyone trying to follow it. The empire grew. New facilities were added to the network. New doctors and administrators were brought into the scheme. New patients were cycled through. And on paper, to any casual observer, to any routine government auditor skimming billing summaries, the whole thing looked entirely legitimate. Philip Esformes wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was hiding in plain sight, attending charity events, running a business that employed hundreds of people, presenting himself as a pillar of the Miami community, a healthcare operator, a philanthropist, a family man. But empires built on the bones of the vulnerable eventually have to answer for the living. And somewhere inside that vast, complex machine, something was beginning to crack. Every empire leaves a paper trail. The bigger the empire, the longer the trail, and the harder it ultimately becomes to hide. By the time federal investigators from the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General and the FBI began seriously examining the Esformes network, the numbers had already started to stop making sense. Billing claims that didn't correspond to patient records that contained diagnoses inconsistent with the residents actually living at the facilities. Medical procedures billed at maximum reimbursement rates for patients who showed no clinical indication they had ever received them. Services billed for procedures that, according to unsealed court documents, simply never happened. The investigators didn't move in with sirens blaring. This was not a Hollywood raid. They moved the way the best financial fraud investigators always do, quietly, methodically, and with patience, pulling one thread, then another, cross-referencing billing records against clinical documentation, mapping patient transfers against Medicare reimbursement claims, building a case with the kind of precision that fraud this sophisticated demands. But the ledger didn't match. That is the moment every white-collar empire fears more than any other. Not the headline in the newspaper, not the moment the handcuffs click. The moment an analyst in a federal office somewhere pulls up a spreadsheet and the numbers refuse to lie any longer. Investigators began mapping the full network, facility by facility, payment by payment, kickback by kickback. And what they found wasn't a rogue manager at a single location making bad decisions. What they found was an architecture, a deliberate, coordinated, years-long construction engineered at the top, with the knowledge and direction of Philip Esformes himself, designed to extract maximum dollars from a government healthcare system that was never built to defend itself against this level of systematic exploitation. The scale was staggering, the duration was staggering, and the human cost, measured not just in dollars but in the dignity of thousands of patients who deserved actual care, was something the dollar figures alone could never fully capture. Here is the fundamental vulnerability at the heart of every criminal enterprise built on other people's silence. Silence is never permanent. Empires of this kind require cooperation. They require doctors willing to sign off on questionable referrals, administrators willing to process claims they know don't reflect reality, insiders at every level of the network willing to take the money and say nothing. And for a long time, a remarkably long time, the silence held. But somewhere inside Esformes' network, it broke. A cooperating witness came forward. An insider whose testimony and documentation gave federal prosecutors a view into the operation that years of external analysis had been unable to provide. The exact details of how the case cracked open are laid out across thousands of pages of federal court filings, the indictments, the plea agreements, the trial records, but the outcome is what matters. The king's own kingdom became the primary evidence against him. The internal records Esformes had generated to manage his empire, the payment ledgers, the referral agreements, the management contracts, the communications between co-conspirators, became the blueprint prosecutors used to dismantle it. This is not a story about one corrupt man in a corrupt company. This is a story about something far more disturbing: how easily a legitimately operating industry, with real facilities and real patients and real government oversight, can be systematically corrupted from within when the people running it are sophisticated enough, patient enough, and ruthless enough to count on nobody ever checking the math. The walls Esformes spent years building to protect his empire, the corporate layers, the disguised payments, the network of compliant insiders, didn't protect him in the end. They became the very structure that prosecutors used to prove the case against him, piece by documented piece. And after years of investigation, after thousands of pages of financial records and witness testimony and forensic accounting, the empire finally came to its breaking point. The indictment, when it came, was extraordinary. Federal prosecutors charged Philip Esformes in what they described in court filings as the largest healthcare fraud scheme ever prosecuted in the history of the United States. The numbers in the charging documents were almost impossible to comprehend. Over $1 billion in fraudulent Medicare and Medicaid claims. A network of more than 20 nursing homes and assisted living facilities. A web of bribery reaching across multiple states. Years of patients whose medical identities were exploited for profit. The trial that followed stripped everything away. The waterfront estate, the luxury vehicles, the courtside seats, the carefully maintained image of a legitimate healthcare executive contributing to his community. What remained was a federal courtroom in Miami and a ledger that, this time, told the complete truth. The jury convicted Esformes on multiple counts. But hold that thought, because what happened next became its own remarkable chapter in the case. The sentence that followed was 20 years in federal prison. Significant, serious. And then, in January 2021, President Donald Trump commuted that sentence in one of his final acts in office, reducing it to time served. Esformes walked out of federal custody having served only a fraction of his original sentence. The legal and ethical debate that erupted was immediate. Victims' advocates were outraged. Former federal prosecutors called it a miscarriage of justice. The scale of the fraud, the largest healthcare fraud in American history, deserved, many argued, consequences proportional to the damage done. The case then entered another legal phase entirely, with ongoing proceedings related to charges that had been ordered for retrial. The reckoning, it turned out, was far from simple, even after the empire itself had fallen. So here is the question worth sitting with. Long after this video ends, how many Philip Esformes are operating right now? Not as household names, not as the subjects of federal indictments, but quietly, methodically, inside a Medicare and Medicaid system that processes over $1 trillion in claims every single year, a system so vast, so complex, and so fundamentally dependent on good faith from the people participating in it, that no audit structure built by human beings could ever fully verify every transaction. The Department of Justice recovers billions in healthcare fraud every year. Multiple billions. Every single year. And that is only the fraud that gets caught, investigated, prosecuted, and quantified. The Philip Esformes case leaves us with three things. The fact, $1.3 billion. Systematically extracted from a government healthcare program over more than a decade. Not through a single dramatic heist, but through the patient. Deliberate exploitation of a system built on trust, one fraudulent billing claim at a time. The system, a regulatory architecture so massive, so dependent on the honesty of its participants, that a sophisticated operator with patience, connections, and the willingness to treat vulnerable human beings as inventory could construct a criminal empire inside it and operate for years before the ledger finally refused to balance. The human nature, greed, at this scale, does not look like what we expect. It does not wear a mask. It does not operate in the dark. It attends charity galas. It sits courtside at NBA games. It hires lawyers and compliance officers and lobbyists. It wears a tailored suit, gives to local causes, and smiles for the cameras, right up until the morning a federal analyst in a quiet office somewhere pulls up a spreadsheet, and the numbers finally tell the truth. The corrupt ledger always balances. It just doesn't always balance on schedule. So tell me, where do you think the next billion-dollar blind spot is hiding inside the American healthcare system? Drop your theory in the comments below. And if this investigation opened your eyes, share it with someone who needs to see it. The ledger is watching.